Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Everybody. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare
Hare Krishna devotees, please accept my humble obeisances of Lord Shri Prabhupada. Welcome devotees to our evening Bhagavad Gita circle. We will be actually continuing on chapter 3, verse 32. And the chapter is entitled Karma Yoga. It will be read and explained and spoken and shared by Pariksit Prabhu from ISKCON Harrisburg. And it's all yours. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshitarini Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare 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 Krishna Krishna, Hare Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Swami Nityanamine Namaste Krishna Gaura Okay, so continuing Bhagavad Gita circle, chapter 3, which is entitled Karma Yoga, text 32. Ye twetat avastuyanto nanutistanti me matam savagyana vimudam stan vidinastan acetasam. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. But those who out of envy disregard these teachings and do not follow them regularly are considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled and ruined in their endeavors for perfection. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The flaw of not being Krishna conscious is clearly stated herein, as there is punishment for disobedience to the order of the Supreme Executive Head, so there is certainly punishment for disobedience to the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A disobedient person, however great he may be, is ignorant of his own self and of the Supreme Brahman, Paramatma, and the Personality of Godhead, due to a vacant heart Therefore, there is no hope of perfection of life for him. Text 33. Sadrisham chetaste swayaha prakriti jnanavanapi prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature. For everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the three modes. What can regression accomplish? Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Unless one is situated on the transcendental platform of Krishna consciousness, he cannot get free from the influence of the modes of material nature, as it is confirmed by the Lord in the 7th chapter, chapter 7, text 14. Therefore, even for the most highly educated person on the mundane plane, it is impossible to get out of the entanglement of Maya simply by theoretical knowledge or by separating the soul from the body. There are many so-called spiritualists who outwardly pose as advanced in the science, but inwardly or privately are completely under particular modes of nature which they are unable to surpass. Academically, one may be very learned, but because of his long association with material nature, he is in bondage. Krishna consciousness helps one to get out of the material entanglement, even though one may be engaged in his prescribed duties in terms of material existence. Therefore, without being fully in Krishna consciousness, one should not give up his occupational duties. No one should suddenly give up his prescribed duties and become a so-called yogi or transcendentalist artificially. It is better to be situated in one's position and to try to attain Krishna consciousness under superior training. Thus, one may be freed from the clutches of Krishna's Maya. Text 34. Indriya syarte ragadvishavya vastitau tayona vasham agached tauhyasya paripantinau. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Those who are in Krishna consciousness are naturally reluctant to engage in material sense gratification, but those who are not in such consciousness should follow the rules and regulations of the revealed scriptures. Unrestricted sense enjoyment is the cause of material engagement, but one who follows the rules and regulations of the revealed scriptures does not become entangled by the sense objects. For example, sex enjoyment is a necessity for the conditioned soul, and sex enjoyment is allowed under the license of marriage ties. According to scriptural injunctions, one is forbidden to engage in sex relationships with any women other than one's wife. All other women are to be considered as one's mother. But in spite of such injunctions, a man is still inclined to have sex relationships with other women. These propensities are to be curbed, otherwise they will be stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. As long as the material body is there, the necessities of the material body are allowed, but under rules and regulations. And yet, we should not rely upon the control of such allowances. One has to follow those rules and regulations unattached to them, because practice of sense gratification under regulations may also lead one to go astray, as much as there is always the chance of an accident even on the royal roads. Although they may be very carefully maintained, no one can guarantee that there will be no danger even on the safest road. The sense enjoyment spirit has been current a very long time owing to material association. Therefore, in spite of regulated sense enjoyment, there is every chance of falling down. Therefore, any attachment for regulated sense enjoyment must also be avoided by all means. But attachment to Krishna consciousness, or acting always in the loving service of Krishna, detaches one from all kinds of sensory activities. Therefore, no one should try to be detached from Krishna consciousness at any stage of life. The whole purpose of detachment from all kinds of sense attachment is ultimately to become situated on the platform of Krishna consciousness. Text 35. Shreyan swadamo viguna paradharmat svanustitat swadharme nidhanam shreya paradharmo bhayavaha. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. One should therefore discharge his prescribed duties in full Krishna consciousness rather than those prescribed for others. Materially, prescribed duties are duties enjoined according to one's psychological condition, under the spell of the modes of material nature. Spiritual duties are as ordered by the spiritual master for the transcendental service of Krishna. But whether material or spiritual, one should stick to his prescribed duties even up to death, rather than imitate another's prescribed duties. Duties on the spiritual platform and duties on the material platform may be different, but the principle of following the authorized direction is always good for the performer. When one is under the spell of the three modes of material nature, one should follow the prescribed duties for his particular situation and should not imitate others. For example, a Brahmana who is in the mode of goodness is non-violent, whereas a Kshatriya who is in the mode of passion is allowed to be violent. As such, for a Kshatriya, it is better to be vanquished following the rules of violence than to imitate a Brahmana who follows the principles of non-violence. Everyone has to cleanse his heart by a gradual process, not abruptly. However, when one transcends the modes of material nature and is fully situated in Krishna consciousness, a Kshatriya may act as a Brahmana, or a Brahmana may act as a Kshatriya. In the transcendental stage, the distinctions of the material world do not apply. For example, Vishwamitra was originally a Kshatriya, but later on he acted as a Brahmana, whereas Parashuram was a Brahmana, but later on he acted as a Kshatriya. Being transcendentally situated, they could do so, but as long as one is on the material platform, he must perform his duties according to the modes of material nature. At the same time, he must have a full sense of Krishna consciousness. Text 36. Arjuno vacha arthakeno prayuktoyam papam charati purusha anistan api vashneya balad iva niyojita. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vishnu, by what is one impelled to sinful acts even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Purport by Srila Prabhupada. A living entity as part and parcel of the Supreme is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of the living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the supersoul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. Text 37. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kama Esha Kruda Esha Rajo Guna Samudbhava Mahashano Mahapapma Vidyanam Iha Vairinam. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world." Purport by Srila Prabhupada. When a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association with the mode of passion. Or, in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If therefore the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities. And when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. This inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutras, wherein it is stated, Atato Brahma Gigyasa. One should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmadhyasya Yato Nyanvat Itarasta Cha. The origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Ram, exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravana. But by doing so, he becomes the greatest devotee of the Lord. Here also, in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord induces Arjuna to engage his wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. Text 38. Dumena priyate vani yatada somalena cha yato bena vitu garbhas Tatha tenedam avitam. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. As fire is covered with smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are 3 degrees of covering of a living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust on the different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position. For the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and the beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you so much for reading this. It's pretty powerful as we are getting into these verses. It's definitely one that I think we can hear over and over again. It's pretty powerful. Would like to ask devotees if you have any questions on what we have read and heard, any takeaways, any clarification, please do raise your hand, or you can just jump right in and ask your question. Especially this last verse that we just read, the 3 degrees of covering. It's something that I think I have to definitely go back and read several times because, wow, it's pretty deep. It's pretty deep. Any questions, devotees? Any comments? Any clarification? Any thoughts? Anything of any sort? Yes, Mother Gita, please, Mother.
Hare Krishna, please accept my humble
Hare
obeisances.
Krishna.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Accept mine, go Srila Prabhupada.
I hope you're feeling better.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting better.
That's
daily.
good.
Yeah.
So I somewhat understood Srila Prabhupada is comparing the human beings to the smoke-covered fire.
Mm.
Where, the Krishna consciousness can be set ablaze. But can you please explain the other 2 analogies? Thank you.
Hare Krishna. So this is on the purport of this last one, 338, we talked about. As you already said, there is some understanding here about when there is a little fire, there may be a lot of smoke, but there's a little fire. And when there's a little fire and the wood is there is the hope that we can stir that fire to make it bigger. And you know what fire does? Fire also burns all things that are, burns everything in its way. Therefore, it, in a sense, it cleanses. So that part is there. So anything less than that, then the person is still quite captured by the modes. So Srila Prabhupada used the fire, small amount of fire, in the human being, because the human being can inquire about, if they want to, inquire about their nature. Atatu Brahma Gigyas. The other entities that Srila Prabhupada compares smoke and so on to, they cannot inquire, or they're helpless. The embryo covering, the embryo covering inside the womb, that analogy Srila Prabhupada prescribed or ascribes it to, or likens it to a helpless situation. The child is helpless, that he cannot move. And he says that stage is also compared to the trees. Now we know the trees cannot inquire about themselves, who they really are, and then they can't even move. So the embryo also, blocks a child in the womb. In fact, the child goes through all kinds of suffering in the womb. Just like the trees can also be, used in any kind of way, and they cannot complain. They cannot. So that's a helpless condition. And that's what he was describing. Srila Prabhupada was describing. And the covered mirror, that was the other one too. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and the beasts. And the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. So covered mirror, well, the mirror can show you who you are, but if the mirror is covered, what can you see? The image does not come about. So birds and the beasts are in one sense a better position than the trees, because the birds and beasts can even move around, and they can defend themselves too. But the trees are in a much more helpless condition. So covered mirror, yes, there's a chance that the mirror can be clean, but you have to come to a situation where things can be seen a little more properly, and that's when the cleansing will come when the soul acquires a human body. So covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and as we talked about, the smoke-covered fire, but there is fire compared to the human being. So that's why Srila Prabhupada ends it by saying that in the form of a human being, a little Krishna consciousness is there, and enough suffering will make the person's intelligence kick in and begin to ask, what am I doing here? Why am I suffering so much? Why is there so much suffering in the world? And that, if they begin to ask those kind of questions, then there's a chance, by the mercy of Guru and Gauranga, they will begin to get answers by which they can then begin to cultivate Krishna consciousness and leave lust aside. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for explaining it so nicely, Prabhu. Thank you.
Krishna Guru's mercy. Jai, Hare Krishna.
Thank you. So we have a couple of minutes, and I want to ask a question to piggyback on Mother Gita's question. So just for my understanding and clarification, so does that mean that Srila Prabhupada is saying is, quote unquote, the safest form of degree to be covered up is in the form of a fire, because there's a little spark, if I'm understanding it correctly?
He's making the analogy that there's smoke. Well, just figure smoke itself, it's uncomfortable. Smoke doesn't by itself give much, but smoke is connected to fire. And the analogy that Srila Prabhupada made was, with some fire, there's some agitation of the mind of the human. That's why he linked a little smoke covered with small amount of fire to a person, to a soul that's now in a human body, And at some point, that person, if he come in contact with a pure devotee of a Lord, or maybe Srila Prabhupada's books, or something connected to Krishna consciousness, then the fire can be made to blaze. But it only comes for a situation where the soul is in the human body. That's why Srila Prabhupada put that particular analogy for those souls in human bodies. A little fire may be there. In other words, the smoke itself can be put in the category of ignorance. The person doesn't really know much, but the potential is there. The little fire is there, that if it's kindled, then yeah, the fire can actually be made to blaze, and then a better understanding can come. The fire of enlightenment, in that sense. The fire of enlightenment, which can only be given by somebody connected with Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. I have another question, if I can ask, because I'm reading, this is a very powerful purport. I mean, definitely requires a lot of analysis, I think. Because towards the end, I'm seeing that Srila Prabhupada is saying, you know, that the last 6 lines, he said that the covered mirror is compared to the birds and the beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. But further up, Srila Prabhupada says that the dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. So I'm trying to see if those 2 lines actually connect, because am I making it too confusing for myself?
No, but see, Srila Prabhupada sometimes uses different analogies in different situations. So, okay, so first, as you said, the covered mirror is compared to the birds and the beasts. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. Okay, so in this state, now he's talking about, as Lord Chaitanya taught us, that we have been, in lifetime after lifetime, covered the soul with dust. So that, if you put it in that category, yeah, where there's dust, definitely dust can be cleansed. When the dust is cleansed out of the mind, then, especially by using spiritual methods like chanting, hearing and chanting, then of course the mirror can be cleaned. So that part, that analogy refers to a person who is realizing slowly through the cleaning process their constitutional position as part and parcel of Krishna, that they are not the body, all of those are all spiritual information that are important. So yeah, in one sense, in one part, in the same purpose, Srila Prabhupada uses that to the mirror as the cleansing process is a cleansing of the heart, or cleansing of a soul, to have things be clear. And then when he was talking about the covered mirror, he wasn't talking about cleansing that at that time when he compared to the birds and the beasts. He wasn't talking about covering. He was just making an analogy of that being for the birds, and the helplessness condition being for the trees, and then the fire, that is a little bit of fire and the smoke, that being for the human being, and a devotee coming in to help with the spiritual life, increasing a person's understanding, being clearing and the blazing of the fire. Yeah, so I don't want to say unfortunately, but in the same purport, the mirror was used differently.
Got it.
One time cleansing of the mirror earlier, and then later on when he was comparing those 3.
Now it's clear in my mind. Thank you.
Any
Any questions? I know we passed the 6:30 mark, but just want to make sure if there are any questions from devotees, any thoughts, any clarification. You can definitely jump right in and ask your questions before we end this. This is a very nice, amazing purport. It requires a lot of focus and trying to dissect and understand this amazing. And it's amazing how Srila Prabhupada writes this article, and this verse and purport, and it's just amazing. Yeah.
He actually said quite a few also in other texts, the purport of other texts before this one. That we even talked about the different prescribed conditions. Do your own prescribed conditions that you're favorable to. Do that, and even if you make mistakes, it's better than imitating other ones that you're not, But then he stayed with Varnashram on that one. The examples he made: Brahman, Varnas, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. He actually compared Brahman and Kshatriya. What Brahmins are allowed to do and Kshatriyas are allowed to do. Kshatriyas can be violent for the nature of, but the Brahman cannot be that way. But then he said, once you transcend all of that to Krishna consciousness, it doesn't matter what you do. Then he gave examples of Vishwamitra and Pariksit. For that matter, Dronacharya also. Dronacharya was supposed to be Brahma, but he was the one that taught the Pandavas, and I was Kshatriya work. So this is it gets interesting. That shows the level, the extent, and how what level Krishna consciousness is at. It's so high that, as we were talking about before we started Daivi Varnashram, a person can be a devotee and then do all kinds of different activities while they are practicing Bhakti Yoga as the most important thing in their life. They can do other activities too, even in the different varnas. So yeah, this is quite intricate, this particular section.
It is, and thank you for bringing it up about the prescribed duties, because that was also one of my questions. How Sri Prabhupada, actually one of my takeaways, how Sri Prabhupada so nicely says it's better to do what we have faultily than to follow someone else and just completely not do it at all.
Imitate it, yeah.
Yes, and imitate. Yes.
Yeah, imitate.
Yeah, and that was, I think, a very powerful takeaway, because sometimes generally people do have the tendency to, imitate, and then they don't do a good job.
It boils down to this: whatever occupational duty that you have, first, it should not be in violation of the 4 regulated principles. And take a jobs that violate the 4 regulated principles. No meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling, no intoxication. Don't do those kind of jobs, because then you have basically put yourself in a situation where, even your work is piling karma. And then follow the instructions of a spiritual master. Live a simple life and chant and hear and serve, and just don't offend other devotees. That's all. I mean, just simple life. Hare Krishna.
And what you just said just reminded me about what Mother Gita said this morning, sanctioned by the Lord. And she was saying, Guru Sadhu Shastra, if everything is in a line and still in doubt, talk to senior devotees. So it's very much similar to what you and Mother Gita were mentioning. So thank you for reiterating it and reminding us about that. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Any other questions and comments? Any thoughts? Any takeaways? Anything that devotees would like to share? Okay, if there isn't, we thank you all for joining us. Just a reminder that we have our regular Sunday program this Sunday. So please do attend our program, and let's all try to be on time, 4:30. And we look forward to seeing all of you this Sunday. Until then, have a wonderful weekend. Vanchakaputubhyascha kripasindavevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.